So if you want to follow along today, I've put my lecture notes up on Inside Ranken. This is the Intro to Firebase lecture, is what we'll be going through today. So hopefully you've all created an account. I'm going to come by and just check where everybody's at there before I get started. So you're in the console. Okay. So the main tool that we're going to be focused on today is this console. Like that's where we're going to be coding and where we're going to be operating today. Tomorrow we'll come back and work more in the Android side of things and connect to what we're going to create and set up here. But my goal today is just to get the database set up, right? So I'm going to walk you through, we'll create one for that movie list app. We'll just kind of set that up first. And then what I'm going to have you do from there is create your own database for the project you're going to do as your final project. So that's kind of the gist of how today's going to work. Is we'll do it once together, and then I'll have you do it once separately as well.
Is Firebase really only for mobile development, or can it be used in other?
For anything, quite literally anything. So Firebase does support web. It does support iOS. It does support Android. You can really do it with anything. If you look at their code examples, they're in like 5 different languages. Okay. So this is really something you can build web applications or anything with. As far as web applications, I would still lean towards Mongo as my preference there, but this can really do anything. It's just most popular with Android, especially because it's a Google-backed product and historically has had really good linkages to Android. That's been the main user of it, but I've noticed that they're starting to push more web, and I think part of that is the shift towards PWA. So I think more people now are using Firebase with PWAs, and so that's part of the change in how they're presenting things. Okay. So, looking around the console, when you go in, you will likely not have any projects yet. My console looks a little bit different because I've already run a course from this. I already have a bunch of student projects in here that I've been added to. Okay. So what we want to do is kind of explore around how does this interface work? How does this console work? Because it's going to be the main tool that we use to set up our databases and to register for different services, etc. Okay, it's where you have to start. You have to start with this before you can actually start writing code to go along with it. So what I want you to do is you should have a button to add a project. Okay, I want you to go click that now. So we're going to go add a new project. Now the project I want to add, I'm going to call movie list. Now, as far as I know, this does have to have a unique name in the end. There's a display name. There's also an ID, and so you'll notice it's kind of suggesting an ID down there. So I'm going to enter this as maybe I'm going to clarify this as AWD 1112 movie list. It will change how it appears in the console. It will not change how you build it into the app. So in terms of the ID, like if I typed it in like this, keeping caps, you'll notice that the ID underneath is all lowercase. Regardless of what I type in, the ID of the project will end up having a lowercase ID. So I'm going to call it that. More than likely, if you give it the same name, it's probably going to give you a different ID because I've just used that ID. I'm going to hit continue. Actually, I don't need Yeah, let's leave let's leave analytics on there. So analytics is an optional thing. Google provides this for a host of their services. It's basically used to track, how your users are using your app, such as where are they clicking on, how much time are they spending in the app, are there crashes, what kind of devices are they using, etc. In here, you will probably need to hit create a new account because you likely will not have one yet. One way you can set this up is you can just say, hey, I'm going to create one for every project. In that way that the analytics will be bound to just that one product. The other way you can do this is you can just say, hey, I'm going to put all my sample projects into the same bin. For our purposes right now, it really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to call this AWE112 sample projects. And hit save. But what you call it really doesn't matter a ton. All right. It asks you what region, so we're going to pick United States, which is pre-done there. And I'm going to go ahead and do the default and accept the license agreements. Okay. So that's just a matter of setting up the analytics account. Now, it's complaining here because somebody beat me to the punch. So I'm going to have to go do it again. AWD112 movie list. And so you'll notice it's got a random identifier at the end. You can actually change that identifier, by the way. So if I wanted to put like my name in there, I could do that. Although it doesn't like that.
I just put my last name on Myers. Me too. I'm loving these images on the side. They're great.
I may just go back and insert this over there. Movie list. I'm just gonna. Why is the continue button grayed out? Here. Okay. Analytics again. Hit select an account. And it didn't create it because it already exists. So it failed. Simple projects. Save. Accept. Create. Okay, good. That worked that time. So we're going to go ahead and create that project. Okay. The project is kind of the root organization for everything you do with Firebase. Firebase being basically the company that runs this. They're a subsidiary of Google, as you can tell by the login process. Okay. So my new project is ready. Okay. So you should be popped into this panel here. By default, when you create a new project in Firebase, there's no services turned on, right? You're just starting with a basic setup where you just have, oh, I have an account. I can then choose what services I want to add, okay? So exploring this a little bit, you'll see over on the left, there's a few different services that you can go in and configure. So you can see that there's authentication over there. There's the Firestore database. There's also the real-time database. There's storage. There's hosting. There's functions. There's machine learning. So you can see all those different services there. Okay. One thing to note that there are two different databases there: Firestore database and real-time database. Okay. They're a little bit different. We're going to be using just one of those, and I want to kind of go into detail why here in a minute about what those two different databases are. You'll also see under release and monitor are things for, okay, now you've got your application out there. Hey, how do you monitor how people are using it? So crash analytics, performance, test lab, and after distribution, all of those things are listed under that category. So all of these things are technologies that you can turn on. Generally, you kind of opt into it, and you have to add a little bit of code to your app, and then it produces and works with what's in the console. You can also see there's an analytics and engage, which has partially to do with advertising and the like. Okay, but we're going to be focused on the build section of this because we're building applications. We're not quite at that point where we have users for them, right? So we're going to be focusing just on building the applications. So one thing to point out here, and I'm going to pull up this document. So there's an article on the Firebase documentation called Choose a Database, Cloud Firestore versus Real-Time Database. Okay, so you can see there's two different kinds of databases. Well, the short explanation of it is there used to be only one. There used to be only one. In fact, going back to the original version of Firebase, Firebase originally had really one service, which was this second piece, this real-time database. That originally was really the only service that they offered. Now they've got a lot more services under their belt. And they've also added a new database. Okay, so you have the real-time database, which is their old database platform. The Cloud Firestore is actually their new database platform. They work on two very different models. Okay, contrary to the name, they're both real-time. They're both real-time. Okay, the way that they are set up, effectively real-time, the old one was really designed to hold a very small amount of data. Very small amount of data. Versus the new one, Cloud Firestore, is much better designed for holding lots of data. So it kind of depends on what kind of data you're storing, how you're going to operate that. But especially if you're having multi-user sort of applications, which is the norm, then Firestore is generally the better choice. If you might have maybe a small user base with certain things, then real-time can still be some of the pick, can still be a pick. Mainly that real-time database is still targeting things like smart homes and industrial automation. Those are cases where maybe it still might be a good pick. But for most Android apps, Cloud Firestore is the one we're going to select. So they say here, Cloud Firestore is the newest database for mobile app development. It builds on the successes from the real-time with new, more intuitive data model. Cloud Firestore also features faster, richer queries and scales further than the real-time database. Whereas they say real-time database is Firebase's original database, it's efficient, low latency solution for mobile apps that require sync states across clients in real time. And so they kind of talk about states that are not just full objects and documents. So your choice of data, as they say here, your choice of database solution will depend on many factors, but when it comes to certain features, we can make some recommendations. So as I said, both of them provide real-time. Contrary to the name, the real-time database is not the only one that provides real-time features. Both of them provide real-time features. Both of them have client side, and both of them have a free tier. So considerations they kind of put in here. There's a lot more stuff in terms of, actually they've got a quiz here. So we talk about, what do you need? Are you just trying to sync a little bit of data around back and forth, or you're trying to sync lots of data and have it queryable, and it's usually going to end up with the latter. Okay. If you're talking about how much data you're using, notice they also ask, okay, well, if you've only got a little bit of data that changes frequently, they suggest the real time. In reality, oftentimes we have a lot of data that some of that data changes infrequently. That varies a little bit. So say you have an online chat application that you're building, people are constantly posting messages. That data would be, in theory, changing frequently, but you have other parts, say your user accounts, that aren't changing frequently. In those cases, I still think that Firestore is the better. They also mention here, when we're talking about the real-time database is just a single JSON document. That's all you get. The entire database is a single JSON document. Versus when we're doing the Cloud Firestore, we get collections, kind of like we do in Mongo. It's the same idea. Where you start with your database, has a series of collections. Collections are kind of like tables. So it's the same starting idea. And it's usually what we want. Usually what we want is not just one JSON object. And we talk about this. I don't know that that makes too much difference in terms of availability. Offline queries, that's kind of a interesting one. Number of databases, instances, just a single database. So if you kind of look through that, you're going to find that for most of our applications, especially the things we're going to be interested in building for business, they're going to be landing into that Cloud Firestore. So you're going to read more in here as to what that is, but enough to say that we will be strictly using Firestore. We will not be using the real-time database because there's enough improvements that they've made to really make that make sense. So where you want to start is you're going to go into Firestore database, and we want to create a new database. So there's a button that should be on the top of your screen. It says Create Database. We're going to click on that. It's going to give us some options. We can either start in production mode or we can start in test mode. Click on Firestore Database. Yep, it's up at the top of the page. Yep. So we're going to get in here. We can either create this in production mode or in test mode. The difference is what security rules in the name is by default. Do you want to start with a database that's locked down and doesn't allow users to do anything? Or do you want to start with a database that's wide open and lets users do anything, right? That has no security, right? You start with no security for all the security in the world, and you have to open doors to do anything, right? If you're building a real-world application, I would strongly recommend starting those real-world applications in production mode. I would strongly recommend starting the real-world applications in production mode. But for today, I don't want to get into security rules yet, so I'm going to start in test mode, so we can talk about security rules at a later date. Okay, so I'm going to start this in test mode so that we won't have to mess with this right now. Unfortunately, that does mean anybody who gets into this database can just go change the data willy-nilly. There's no controls around it. Okay, so that's usually not what we want, but we will start with that. You can kind of see a preview of the security rules on the right. The long story short is it lets you do anything, but there's an expiration date on it here where it's going to shut off access on March 17th and go back to fully locked down. So it gives you kind of a window of openness. So we're going to start in test mode. It's asking me next about the locations. There are a bunch of different locations that we can select. This can affect pricing. So there is a document that I left that I pointed to on the reading material about the different locations. But I do believe the one we want to start with is this multi-regional one, NAM5. I do believe that the one that they automatically select is the right place to start. Okay. So it's going to go ahead and provision the database, get all the servers up and running, and there we go, right? So now we have a server up and running for our database. We can connect to it. The files are already set up. And you'll notice that there's not much in here yet, okay? So the general flow, the general organization of data in Firestore is very similar to what it is in Mongo. At the top layer, we have a database. as you've seen, that database is within a project. Within that database, there are collections. And those collections contain documents. Turns out that terminology is the exact same terminology that Mongo uses. Okay, so database at the top is what holds all of our data. Collection, you can kind of think about it as a table. It's like different types of data. So if I have users, I would create a users collection. If I've got products, I create a products collection, movies collection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Orders, users, et cetera. And documents are the actual objects, the actual things, right? So another way, like this is the array, they're the list, and this is the object. So that's where we want to start. So I want to create a new collection. This collection I'm going to call movies. Does need to be all, I think convention is usually to do these all lowercase, but I do think it allows different cases, and I do believe it's case sensitive. But I'm going to go create a collection of movies. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. It will immediately ask me about creating documents. So kind of like the idea with Mongo, a collection doesn't really exist until there's documents in it. So we asked immediately to add some data to that. Okay. Kind of like Mongo, it's also schemaless. This is a NoSQL database. There's no schema. So different documents within that collection can have different properties, or their properties can have different types. In general, we want to keep things in sync as possible so that all of those documents within the collection generally have the same properties, the same field with the same data types, but they don't necessarily have to. Okay. So in here, every document has to have some form of ID. Okay, also known as the key. Okay. Depending on how you're building things, sometimes people go down the route of choosing that and typing that in. There also is the option here of automatically generating one. So one way you can go about this is you can automatically generate IDs if you want to do that way. That being said, most of the time, we're going to manually type them in. You can do automatic, but generally speaking, we're going to type in an ID. Okay. That comes down to a lot of times we're going to use this for querying purposes. This idea is the main way that we're going to query the data. And there's a lot of benefit to customizing how we specify that ID. Okay? So it's actually more common in the Firebase world to have that custom selected in some way, shape, or form. If you're, say, having users, this is typically where we put actually the username to guarantee that the username is unique, rather than a typical random user ID. So for our purposes, we're building movies, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the name of the movie and put it in there separated by dashes. So let's go back to our movie list. I think I did the 3 Matrix movies. So I'm going to say, hey, the document ID is Matrix. Within that, I'm going to have a field name, and that's a string with the value of matrix or the matrix. I can also add additional fields. So for instance, let's say I want maybe a release year. So that would be a number. And what year was that released in? That was in 1999. Okay. What are some other things I might want to have in? What are some other things I might want to store about the movie? The director? Okay. So who was the director for this movie? Let's see. See if we can find that out.
It's the same for all 3. That's better.
I think it is. And I should know this.
Girl.
Wachowskis. There we go.
Holy cow.
So
You're never dead.
okay, Wachowskis. Other thing I might want to have in here is maybe a path to the image, right? So I might want to have a path to their movie poster. I can leave that blank for the moment, right? So you can start kind of typing some data in just for whatever you're starting to model, right? So I'm modeling movies. I just decide what data I want to capture and what the names of those fields are, what the value that goes in there, and how I'm going to store the data that goes in there. Once you've created that, I can go ahead and hit save. Okay. You can now see that I've got a movies collection, which over in the far left. In the middle, you're seeing the documents, and on the right, you're seeing the fields within that document. Okay. Let's say I want to add another movie. So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go over here, rather than creating another collection, I'm going to add a document. And so this would be maybe matrix 2, the name. I want to keep those same field names that I used from before. This would be matrix reloaded, which was what year? (2003). Okay. Release year. Number 2003. I had the director. Go ahead and add that in there, and the image. Okay. It's also worth noting, so once I've added another document, you'll start to see that here. It's worth noting, once you've added a document, you can also use this to go edit those documents. So let's say here I forgot to put in the director. I can copy that from the other. Go ahead and use the pencil and put that in to update that field. Right. So I can create documents here. I can edit them. I can delete them. Yes. Yeah. So let's say a common thing you might want to do in this case is I might want to have genres, right? So I could go down here to, there's actually two ways to do this. I could go down to array, and I could say, hey, this is a genre, and maybe something fits in, maybe the movie fits into two genres. Like, so you might say, this is an action movie, or this is a romance movie, right? You could add both of those things as an array, okay? If I go ahead and hit add now, this document now has a genre field, right? And that genre field is an array. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, so that is one option. You can have arrays of things within those documents. That's legal. There is a bit of a gotcha in that there are problems with using arrays. So oftentimes with the world of Firebase, they generally recommend against using arrays. It's actually usually better to use something called a map instead. Okay, let me show you how I would use a map in this place. I'm going to go ahead and change the field. So I'm going to go to, I want to delete the field first, and you can delete the genre field. Another way that I can map this, genre, if I go down to map, I might say action, and this is a Boolean, which is true, romance, Boolean, true. So it's generally actually recommended in most cases to use a map over an array with this kind of structure. The reason for doing that is mainly down to it works better when multiple people are editing and working with the document. It's easier to blend those different changes together. Everybody good with that? You see the difference there? So I'm just using really the values as the keys. So action true, romance through rather than using that as an image. So that's typically recommended to do that, to structure it that way instead of with an actual image.
So is it like recommended to use like some Boolean values, or is it really just a set?
What do you mean to use the Boolean values?
Well, you could have put like a string, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could have put like string, right? I could have said the key is this, but really I'm just trying to say this is in the list or outside the list. So true being that it's in the list, false or not present meaning it's not in the list. Because remember, what I'm trying to really represent is it in these genres or not in these genres, right? So that's really what I'm trying to do. It could be any other type though, right? Depending on what I need, I might say, what might be an actual example where I want to have a map with strings. Maybe one thing that comes up, if I wanted to represent the images, let's say I had more than one image, let me go ahead and delete the image field and add a field called images. Make this a map. And I might say, maybe we have the thumbnail, and that is some sort of image, some sort of URL. Maybe I have the what do we call it? The poster. And cast one. And so I might have some sort of structure like this, where the movie has multiple images, but those images kind of have different purposes, right? So a thumbnail for a poster and pictures for the cast. Okay, so that's a case where I might have a map. Make sense? So there's a bunch of different ways that you can set this up, and a bunch of different ways you can model it. But maps and arrays are an option there. We just generally use a map over an array in those cases. Okay, so I can start to kind of flesh that out. I can have as many collections as I need. I can have as many documents as I need. All those documents, as you see, have to have some sort of ID that uniquely identifies them within the collection. But then you can decide to put whatever data you need with it. Other questions? Questions so far? Okay, so we've added some data there. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of theoretical aspects here. I'm going to pull in some reading, parts of the reading material. Reset. Okay, so there are a few articles that I asked you to read. One of them was about the Cloud Firestore data model. Okay, which will kind of start talking about some of the stuff that we've already seen. You know, this idea of collections and documents. So you can see those parts. There's also this idea of references. Every document can be uniquely identified by its location. It's also worth noting that you can actually have a nested structure to things. So for instance, actually in the world of Firebase, documents can also have sub-collections. You can have collections that are inside of a document. That's legal. Okay, so that would be maybe a property or further down. Within those sub-documents, you can have documents, sub-collections, you can have documents, and this process repeats. So you're going to have things actually deeply nested, depending on what your needs are. So examples of that might be, maybe you have a collection of products. Those products have reviews. So maybe inside of the products collection, maybe you have a sub collection of the reviews that go with that product. You can do those kind of things. And then you might have or comments that go with the bug, or test cases that go with the bug, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can have a variety of different things there. It's not always the best choice to do things here. A lot of times it may be a better choice to go ahead and make those reviews a separate collection, or to make your friends list or like counter or whatever it may be. You oftentimes will maybe consider making that a collection rather than a sub-collection, because there are some limitations, such as if you need to query across multiple documents, then sub-collections are a little bit more to work with. So that exists in there. It's an option, but it is one that we don't always utilize, depending on what our needs are. It can provide some efficiency, but it can also mean that some queries are a lot harder to run. Okay. I do want to actually just go play this video up at the top here. I'm just going to introduce what it is. We've already seen some of the parts, but I'm going to go ahead and play that here for everybody. So I need to go ahead and plug in audio. Laptop.